All right, we'll just give everybody a few minutes to trickle in here. Hey everybody, we're just gonna give a few more minutes for some last minute people coming in for a good lunch and learn. All right, we'll just get started, and as people trickle in, we can answer those questions. So good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. Welcome to today's Decisions Lunch and Learn. I'm Morgan Russell. My pronouns are they, them, and I've been with Decisions for 1.5 years. I'm on the solutions engineering team. Looking forward to answering any questions y'all may have today. So just like any other lunch and learn, you can raise your hand if you'd like to come off mute and verbalize your question. Otherwise, feel free to use the chat function to submit your questions there through text, and we can work through them together.
Hi, Morgan.
Hi, how are you doing?
Well, thanks. I'm Lawrence Harity. Thanks. I don't know if this is the right forum, so tell me if it's not. We've recently subscribed to the SaaS to the cloud solution, and so we're kind of complete beginners at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But before we kind of get started any of the business config on the technical side, we want to make sure that any sort of storage that Decisions uses to store our data. So for example, if we send a document that requires approval, we want to make sure that that document is placed in a Office 365, probably a SharePoint location, but either or Azure storage, and yeah, sort of so it resides there rather than on the decisions data on a decisions database. I don't know if that's too much sort of technical detail to get into on this call, or if it's how to go about that, or other sort of one of the guides you can point me to help me figure out where to start, because yeah, I've sort of can't even really find the right technical documentation to help me.
Gotcha. Okay. I believe with SharePoint, it's going to be something very similar to how we have integrations with Dropbox and Google Drive. We might already have one in our modules. I'm going to check there to see if we have any modules. So system administration and features, I believe, is where all our modules, the out of the box modules are here, and you can install one. Yes.
We do have a SharePoint module.
Okay, perfect. So we already have SharePoint module. So right here in my environment, I'm just in our solutions development environment. Again, you can get there by systems admin and then features. And depending on if you're in 6 or 7, your view will be a little bit different here. But you want to just scroll down and find that SharePoint module. Here we go. And in 6 or 7, you can go ahead and install that.
Okay.
And then using that module, you'll have to set up, the kind of integration details of connecting to your individual SharePoint system there. And I believe we'll probably have a document on that as well on our documentation site for connecting that up for you. Yeah, so the SharePoint module basics here will be kind of walk you through how to use that module and using that steps that are already in decisions. So connecting decisions to your SharePoint and to those folders so you can add documents directly into the SharePoint location that you would like.
Okay, great. And then in terms of usability, so if one of our workflows involves, yeah, sending someone a document,
Mhm.
does that mean, will that ultimately mean that the user can add the document via the decisions front end and that document be saved in SharePoint? Or is it sort of a two-step process where they have to save the document in SharePoint and then sort of reference it from the decisions portal?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, I believe it can work both ways. So you can have it just be one process. So the flow that's running in the background, the user is in decisions and,
Yeah.
they interact with sorry, I have so many dashboards open. They interact with decisions and then the background of that form, the flow that's running that form has the steps to move things around in SharePoint without that user having to log into SharePoint themselves, since you set up the integration.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I'll have a look and get started. Thanks, Morgan.
Yep. No problem. And that document, you can just search SharePoint on the documentation site to pull that up here. Yeah, no problem. All right, and I believe we've got another question that came in. So the question from Scott, we have, can you discuss the auto refresh options on a report, specifically looking into refreshing a report on a dashboard after a member has submitted a ticket? Okay, great. So let me pop into, let's see, I'm on Solutions Dev, so we'll just go over to my local and look at an existing dashboard, actually on Solutions Dev. So got a lot of dashboards on here, so let me pull up one that I know has some of that for us. Well, we can set it up the default, but if we create a page real quick over here, so create form and create new, pick our page/dashboard. We'll just make a new page to show off that page refresh test for us. And so we're talking about refreshing a report viewer. So probably have a good default report that we can already choose. So let me look at what I've got. Usually make a bunch of test account report, sample account filters. We can start with that. So I just selected our report that we want to take a look at. And so we can take a look at it real quick. This one's just got an account filter on it. So we'll remove that for our purposes here. So back on the properties panel of our report viewer, I believe it's in behavior, is going to have where we can set up that refresh. So we have auto refresh, which you can set up the default time. So you can say it's automatically refreshing dependent on how many days, hours. But from what it sounds like, your use case, you're wanting it to refresh after a particular thing happens. So for that, what we like to use is on current folder change. Yeah, current folder change. So you don't have to have a minute, 5-second interval, just meaning that if a bunch of these actions are going off at once, your dashboard's not going to refresh because you have 20 users all kicking off this thing. It'll refresh after 5 seconds if those things have all happened at the same time. So you can define that minimal interval depending on how many systems you're running. The default there is 5 seconds. I generally leave it at that. So what that's going to do is going to say anytime there's a change on this folder, we'll refresh. So in your flow, there's actually a particular step that you'll use to refresh it. So we're going to close and save out of this page. And since it's just a default page right now, let's go ahead and just publish it on our Lunch and Learn folder. And so taking a page and publishing it, we'll make it our dashboard. So to publish that page, we go manage, whatever folder you want it to be on. So if we wanted just a quick sample dashboard page, doesn't need to have the capabilities of a designer folder. So we can just make a regular folder. So let's call it sample dashboard. And we'll create that. And now on this folder, we can manage, go to page/dashboard, and then add a page/dashboard. Page name, we'll say this is accounts refresh. We'll just say report refresh. Might swap out that report there for us. So this is the name that the tab's going to show up on the top where you click it. And you can change the order if you have a bunch of pages on here. We'll then select our page. The one we just made was this page refresh. We might add this one after if we take a look there. So we select our page, go ahead and hit save. And now at the top, the new option there, new tab for us is now that report refresh. So off the bat, we just have that report that we added. But now that it's published, we can get this folder ID. And that's the important part here. We're going to need this folder ID for the step to actually send the folder event change. So we've got a report, we've got the settings configured on the page so that when a folder change happens, this report will refresh. And in order to kick that off, oops, excuse me, did not mean to go into that folder. Let's just show off the step in a flow. So say if this was one of your, let me look at our question again real quick. So we had, it was like a ticket is submitted. So if this was like sample ticket, let's not type in there, sample ticket, submit. So in your flow, you have the logic, you're creating the ticket, you're going through, all your stuff happens. And then at the end, I'm just going to drop a placeholder step just to kind of show that off. So here, all your logic's happening, whatever you need to get done. And then at the end, we're going to send a folder change event to refresh it. And folder. So you want just the regular send folder change event. So this step, you provide it a folder ID, and it basically goes and refreshes on that folder any of your page elements that had that setting turned on in behavior that was checked to say, hey, refresh on folder change event. They'll refresh when this step is hit. So we set this to constant, and then just what we copied, we paste in that folder ID of the folder where that dashboard is published, the folder where that page is on. And that's how you would do that. If you've got more than one dashboard or more than one folder that you want to refresh when an action or a logic takes place, what I would suggest is a subflow. Let me quickly drag one out. I usually do it for whatever process I'm working on. I just make a quick subflow that's just called, I probably have tons of them in here. It's just a refresh dashboards subflow. So this will just be our sample one here. It's essentially the same, what you would do in your subflow. So you have multiple dashboards. So you have the manager's dashboard as well as, a current user dashboard just for the submitter to view it. If you want to refresh all those dashboards at the same time, what you do is still using that create dashboard, the send folder event step. We're just gonna do it in a loop with multiple IDs here. So still send folder event will happen. But what you want to do is a create data step and then create a list of dashboard IDs. Dashboard IDs. No, we'll say dashboard ID list for naming convention. So just strings, because this is just going to hold all the GUIDs, all the folder IDs that you want to refresh. And I'll rename my step so I know what I'm doing here. Create dashboard ID list. And with that dashboard ID list, we're going to feed that into our for each step. So for each step is going to take whatever you pass in as the collection, that list of things, and iterate through them. So each of them is going to go down the next path and have logic carried out on it. So we're going to have this one do for each dashboard ID. So I like to rename that just so know what it's looking at. And our collection now, which updates with whatever you pass in, since it just accepts objects, we're going to pass in that dashboard ID list, which is what we just created in that create data step. So I'll just hit done there. And now we see it updated the type. So now I know it's a string. And for consistency, we're going to rename our item to be called dashboard ID. And now for each dashboard ID, we're going to send a folder change event. So now on the folder change event, which I'll just take out the little one, we will pick from flow and actually grab that dashboard ID. So this is the whatever the loop is currently on, we're refreshing that dashboard. So we're going to go through all the dashboard IDs and refresh all the dashboards that are associated with it. Let's see, expected string. Did I pass in? This needs to be a list. Forgot to check the list box here. So it's not just one string. We want a whole list of dashboards there. So we'll have to update this one here. And pick that again. So it updates. It's now we're looking at a list of strings there with those little brackets. All right. And then what you would do, depending on the IDs of your dashboard, you would just build this list here. You could dynamically go and fetch them or something else logic-wise, but we'll just paste in the one we have. And if you had another one, you just paste that one in as well. So it'll iterate through all of those. All right, let's take a look at this next question. We've got, how can I convert or map an object output to a matching data simple flow structure, trying to dynamically grab it from a different object using the get property on object, currently converting it to JSON before the JsonDeserialize step to map it back into the needed simple flow structure. Okay, so converting object output to matching a simple flow, trying to dynamically grab different object on the property. Let's take a look here. So I'm just going to close out of here and open up a new flow for us. So if you have that multiple dashboards, what I would do there is just have your refresh flow. So then all those dashboards can get up to date there at once. Okay, so let me take a look and build in this flow that we have here while we're in it to look at object to a simple flow structure. So let me real quick go and make a simple flow structure on the outside. So let's create a data structure and we'll make a simple flow. Did I pass it? Just a simple flow structure. So simple flow structures are really light. They never get written down. The data never persists. It just moves through the flow. So sample simple flow structure. And we'll just have name, email, and date of birth as our sample fields. And that'll be a date, time, namespace is lunch and learn. That's good with me, and that's good for us. So I just created that simple flow structure. Dynamically grabbing it. Okay. So now in our new flow, I'm gonna make a object to simple flow. Okay. So we're using the get property on object step. Property on object, property names on object. So get property on objects, select the property path and the target object. Trying to remember what property path requires us to do there. I might have something similar. Working with objects can be tricky just because it could be any type. So I definitely see how this could be an issue there. And we're trying to map it into our SimpleFlowStructure, dynamically pulling it, converting to JSON.
Morgan, hi.
Yes, hey.
So the property path would be like the email, the name of the field.
Gotcha.
So
gotcha.
that's what I'm trying to dynamically fill in and get that data. The problem is it's a nested structure. So when I output it on this step, it's an object that I can't find a way to convert back into the data structure.
Oh, so it outputs here as an object.
Correct.
Yeah. And you want to then map it. Okay. So a mapping step should do that for us. So you have list mapping if you're doing a list, or just a regular mapping, taking object to it. So let's look at how that outputs. So I'm going to have this be constant, nope, select from flow and add an input of our simple flow type. Actually, no, that's going to add an input as an object. Sorry, there. We'll create data for our type. So I'll do sample data. And let's do our simple flow structure. What do we just call that one? Sample simple flow structure for us. Sorry, we're going to build. Is it a constant? Put in an email. At decisions.com and a name. Birthdays today is always good, and that's our sample data. So now if we pass that in as our target, let's look at the output of that step. So we'll debug to see how that's looking for us currently. So we're creating that simple structure and then passing it into get property on object. Let's look at the inputs and outputs. Okay. So here it outputs that name, and now you're trying to pass it back into that type.
Yeah.
In the end there. Okay. If we just have that property, depending on what you're trying to do, if you're trying to, I'm sorry, I got a little bit of a crowd around me there, if that's loud. But if you're just trying to potentially update it, you could use a mapping step. So a mapping step takes all the fields that are existing in the flow up to that point and allows you to update them. It doesn't save anything or lock anything in, but it updates the fields there. So we've got some system constants here. I think we might have to save and come back in for it to recognize the rest of the fields we created. So I'm gonna save and come back in. And take a look. Now that's got our sample data here. So we would then build that data. And let's select that email from flow. So the output object comes out like that. And let's see if we just do a pop-up to show that data, then that it's updated in that flow for us. I can grab this little orange, perfect. I'll just do a pop-up to show that data. And we'll pick the message, will just be our actual sample data's email since we just outputted that. Well, also check it as the output too, but for now, let's see if that updated it. We go through, we got pop-up, it's got our email address. So directly mapped, since that's just a simple type, it moved through there. I'm gonna change this to directly show the output of that step. There we go, this one here, and see how that shows for us. Okay, and that still is able to come through. So when you're mapping it, we're trying to get that output, it's not mapping correctly, or have you tried using that mapping step or something else here?
I didn't know about this mapping step.
Oh, no
to be
worries.
honest.
It's one of the simple ones that's exceptionally useful. So that might work for your use case, as well as potentially just create data and then updating a particular field, depending on what you're doing in that flow. It looks like whatever type you expect. So since this, we're expecting a string for that particular type, it outputs that object as an object since it doesn't know what it is off the bat, but you can move it through as that expected type. So we can test that out and try. I think we had date of birth as our other one, and try to map that into our other field. And select that from flow from our object. Might be mad about it being a date and field, but let's try it. See if it stops us at that flow. Okay, that does it. And it did show us the new pop-up with that date that went in. So it does output that as the expected type, even though it says object there. So you might be able to, in your flow, just continue using whatever element you grab as expected type, even potentially with this issue. It's saying, hey, we're expecting a date time, it's an object, but object does kind of blend into that field well still. So it should still work for you.
Yeah, it looks like it should. All right. Thank you very much, Morgan.
Yeah, no problem. Let's look. I think there was another question in the chat. Okay, so new question. We have a situation where we're passing a message to a different system that is primarily fixed text, but contains a case variable. The end users would like to have the ability to edit this text directly without requiring codes or steps. So it can be done. So I know that this can be done if there were not a variable, but I'm not aware of a way to directly modify this variable in play. Okay. So we're passing in a message to a system and it's got a case variable. So case variable, do you mean upper and lower case, or it's a decisions property?
It's a case entity.
Case entity, okay.
Yes, when I say message, I just now realized that you might be taking that as like the technical message. I mean like a statement message. It's literally text.
Okay, it's text, okay.
Yes, it's literally text. But in the middle of this text, it will say, like account number, and then we grab the account number for the case we're working on and insert it. So they would like to be able to create a table, because in addition to the fact that it's going somewhere else and has a variable in the middle of it, the end system is expecting 36 character chunks. 8 36 character chunks. So they would like an 8-line table where they can put in up to 36 characters. and then somehow magically have it determine that it's supposed to grab the account number and insert it in the appropriate place without them having to use access any code steps or request any code being updated. I don't know how to do that. I don't think it's possible.
It definitely, if it's just text, it seems possible. So they're saying we want to change that variable. So change the account number and then move forward in the
So-
process.
No. What
Okay.
they're saying, so it would be like a statement message on like your bank account. So it would say like ACH to blah, 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 blah. Account number 12345. So they may at some point decide they want it to say account number 12345, and then the second line should say ACH to blah, 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 blah. So where the account number used to be in field 2, now suddenly it's in field 1. And it needs to go back, reference the case that it's in, grab that account number, and tuck it into where we've said, where they put in something to represent account number. And know that potentially 100 times a day, which account number which specific ID it's working with. Which specific case.
So trying to change the formatting in this, like the order of this text, this information.
Correct.
Okay, let me create a quick form for us to mess around with. So I'll just have it be test form for us today. I believe there is a component that'll let you manipulate both text as well as your inputs. I think it's merge something. It's like a custom merge box. There's compact merge editor. It's one of these. So we'll take a look at both of these. I think compact merge editor versus merge editor. But let's take a look together. So here with real quick, let me drag in a button so our elements aren't mad about that. Submit button for us. Okay, for the compact merge editor, I'll rename it so we know which one this one is. Compact. Oop. We need the data name for it. It's talking about merging the variables for all the forms for it. So this one, I believe, is the one that we're going to want to use where you can send in data for the user to interact with. And they can build that like a message or that email structure, whatever you want it to be. So let's call it case information or case data for us there and test it out. We'll have this one pull in the same data just to test that too. Case data, all forms, take a look at both of those. So ahead of this, we're going to fetch our case. So I'm just going to use one that I have existing in this system. So let's just fetch. I have sample case entity. We'll just get them all using this step, see if we have any in our system there, and then pass in the first one. So I'm going to do array first item on our output just to pass in. Not change value, rename there, rename as sample case. So whatever data you'll wanting to pass in there, you fetch that first and bring it in. So this is saying it's a string, so we don't want that. We need something else.
Okay, so you're saying that we have to have a case selected before we use this?
Potentially, let me look in. I know there's one where, well, you're going to need the data for what particular, you said your account ID or case ID that you're looking at. So you want to have that data has to be able to come through here.
Right, so they want it backwards from that. What they want is just to say, not a specific case when they're editing the form. They want to say, bring in the account number of whatever thing I'm running this against later.
Okay. So on the form, you select here and figure out your account?
No.
No, we don't have any of those cases.
The problem, so Okay, the case entities are transactions that we're running through every day. So there could be 150 of them a day.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's not a lot, but
Oh,
let's
yeah,
just do it.
definitely.
Okay, so what they want is a standalone form where they can say, every time you need to send this message, put in 1, 2, 3, 4, blah, 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 and then go grab the account number for this specific thing on the fly and tuck it in the middle of this message.
Okay, gotcha. So you'll this component will still work for you, but you'll just have to use some data flows along it. I was going to create a sample data, so there's some data in the flow, but you'll be able to do that same functionality of what we're talking about, I believe here. So you can't play structure, but I see what you're saying. You want it afterwards. So we'll just
Completely separate from the flow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Just making sure.
Yeah, definitely. Let me just build data real quick. We'll just pass in. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna fetch one real quick using one of my case entities that I've got already existing. So we should have a sample of this. Just have data in the flow here. Okay. So these two components, both of them work pretty well. They're just different views of it. So, what I sent in as data to the form was just a line that said test. So that's why that populated here. And then any of the data that you have accessible, that you set up as accessible in your flow, is what's going to pop up as kind of fields to input on the side here. So you can add them in. Let's see if we have more than just our icons. This one's just got icons there, but this is how you would be able to add it in, like data into the flow. So even though this is an icon, if you had more data set up on the component on your form, this is how you could provide, a place for the user to go ahead and say account number and set that all up, and then find from the data that's being populated the particular account and select that in.
Okay, when you say from the data that's being populated.
So it would be on the form here. So you'd have probably another component on your form to actually either search accounts and then, populate the data inside that component.
See, that's still not going to work for me.
No.
What I'm saying is they need to be able to grab just the variable. And I don't mean the results of the variable. I don't mean that this specific account number is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, they need to grab the variable account ID. And then when some other process runs later, it's going to have a bunch of text, and in the middle of it, it will drop the appropriate account ID.
Just the declaration of a variable that needs to be pulled later.
Yes.
Okay, then yeah, you can definitely determine that through here. If there's a particular place, you can select it, or another element that you want to select that particular account that's going to be worked with that is used later on in the process. That's definitely another component you could add on the side, either a drop-down list or something else that'll be populated from fetching all of them and pulled from the data that they provide.
What would also be cool is you can even just kind of set up a text box and let them write out what they want, and then use some kind of indicator for the variable, like an @ symbol or a $sign or something. And then later on in your flow, if you need to pull that variable name, you could just set up like a truth table to say, okay, if they put account number or account ID, then we'll just replace the $sign and account ID with the actual account ID.
Okay, so
So
formatting it.
Numbers would be in the truth table in that case?
What would be in the truth table?
It would be a variable from what it sounded like. So in this text box, the individual could go ahead and you could use a multi-line or bigger text box and write out their whole message and then leave a particular character specified for it, for the account or whatever information you want to drop in later. So we could say, you know, removed, and then a particular $sign was what we were saying as an example
Okay.
at this time. And, you know, so then later this text can be pulled and swapped out this particular specified character that's not going to occur anywhere else for the account ID
The
in
account
a
ID
text merge.
of the specific case I'm working with at that time. So what they're doing here is just setting up the text, and then this text is going to be a default.
Yes,
gonna be-
and then it'll
Mhm.
pull the actual text for what needs to be supplied there at runtime when it needs to be processed.
Mhm.
So you're not
Maybe
trying
I've
to
still
split this
not
up.
made this. Either I'm not understanding you or I haven't made myself clear. So, okay, they want this to set up the text. They would put in removed account ID from yada yada blah blah blah. That's fine.
Mhm.
That's absolutely fine. This would be a standalone process. They hit save, close, whatever. That process is completed. Then I need to take the 8 separate lines
Mhm.
and then insert them into a case process.
Separate lines and insert it in. So when you say insert into the case process, what does that entail? Just providing that text again, or
I'm not sure.
okay.
Honestly.
If you have that variable, like that variable was accessible here in the form when we use this component here. So when you set it up there, it will still be accessible in the flow. So you could still use it later down the road in your process. So it won't go away. It'll still exist in your flow. So you could use the particular one that was picked. And whatever was, you know, whatever the user goes ahead and writes in here later on.
So I have, in this case, my extension data is called payment transaction. So it would say payment transaction dot account ID, let's say. And so you're saying I would have to, in this kind of separate flow, I would pass in an extension so that I could then go grab the appropriate variable. And then as long as I passed in the same type of extension ID in the flows, it will pick it up.
Yes, as long as you pass that data in, then it'll carry on through. You can have it as a second flow. So if this was your main flow here, you could have a subflow that goes on and does further logic depending on what you're trying to do there. So
this part would be standalone. So this would be some random person making a change, I don't know, once every 8 months. And then for the next 8 months, it should use whatever they've put in that form in every flow that requires it.
Yeah, then you just have to save and reference it in those other flows. So following this step, you would have some sort of save case entity, or if it's a case, you can do a selective update afterwards on that data to then save it to the system. So you can reference it later or whatever table you're saving it to. So in your other flows, you can just fetch that information and then they'll all reference that from there on. As long as you're saving it using that same variable name.
Okay, so this has a single line of text, which is fine for demonstration purposes. But for the way this needs to work, they would have 8 individual lines, only one of which will have this variable in them.
Okay.
So I need to provide them a means to potentially insert the variable into 8 different lines, or the character, whatever it is, into any one of those 8 different lines. And then from there, go on and merge them together in the way I need them later on.
Yeah, so you could either choose to save those 8 lines individually in your structure, wherever you're choosing to save them, or as one thing. And then when they're going to be used again, broken up by line break and chop them up that way. There's a lot of different options there, but this will still work as far as what you're passing in if you pass in multiple lines, and you can still have the variable inserted wherever you need, as long as it's split up by those lines. You can also define it separately. So you could have a text box for each line. So each one can have a different, particular name. So this comes out, you always know that this is line 2, whatever they enter here, and then have those subsequent lines after that. So you can keep track of the data that way, if that would make more sense for how you're handling the data and saving it later.
Okay.
Mhm.
Great. Thank you very much. I'll have to rewatch this video multiple times, but
Yeah, no worries. There's a ton of different ways to do stuff, but there's lots of ways for you to do it. This is the compact merge editor, where you can have different variables accessible, put them all in a particular line, merge them together in a string, or you could have a bunch of different components there, where you block it up and have potentially like that $sign or particular key that you would go and pass in that account ID back into later on.
okay. I think that might be the better choice.
Okay. Yeah, whatever works best. Decisions definitely has ways to get it done for you.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to help. Okay, let's see. Got another question. We have form in a flow that scrolls at the bottom. And how can I have the form start scrolled at the top of the page? Also, the form contains grid layouts that hide and show from a drop-down selector that I can hide and show my different grids with active form flows. But the form backdrop container still shows its full size instead of expanding, as different grid selections appear with it. Definitely one of those tricky ones with the visibility on a form. So let's create a new form for you there. Your form size itself will not resize, but the components can resize. So your vertical stack will be able to adjust size, but the actual outer form itself is not going to scale or subtract, if that's the function you're looking for there. Currently, that's not supported, but what a lot of people do instead for it with a vertical stack, there are simple forms. It sounds like you're working in 7. So actually, let me make a simple form for us. Not a flow. Create a form. So a simple form, if you're working in 7 and potentially your form is not as complicated, doesn't have advanced data grids or rich text displays, you could use a simple form. And that's going to, by default, be on a vertical stack and kind of expedite the process a little bit. So it's on a vertical stack off the bat there for us. And what you can do is you can show button panel, which automatically gives you a set of buttons. You can rename the buttons and change that up, but by default it gives you a kind of an OK submit button and a cancel button. In your vertical stack here, then you can drag out your components and have still your hide show capabilities. But again, the form itself is not going to kind of get bigger or smaller depending on what elements you have. Let me go and show, let's see, I'm in my local. So let's go into a form that I know we've got big vertical stack for us. I might have one on my local. So for hiding and showing one, should have it on all of my candidate flows. So I'm just going to go and kick off one of our configuration settings flow. Let's look at asset management and error handling. We've got that hiding and showing there. Doesn't get too much bigger though. I guess we'll make one for us. So let's actually
Well,
make our.
very quickly, if you don't mind, Morgan, me.
Oh, yeah,
jumping
go
in
for it.
really quickly. Mike, to answer your question, yeah, the contents of that form or that's in the form layout or the vertical stack is not going to impact the overall form size. So if the static form size for how you design it is going to stay the same no matter what you hide or show.
Yep, but with your vertical stack, what a lot of people will do is, depending on your components, you can make the actual grid that it's on like smaller than all the components over it. So it'll only show the particular elements that you expect to be seen. So if say you have your multi-line text box and your file upload at the same time, you could just size this. Ooh, we can select the right thing for us. Sorry about that. So you would size the actual vertical stack itself to only encompass the expected size of whatever you intend to be seen at one time. So we would actually make this one smaller and expect just a particular thing to be shown here. Let me drag out a button for us. And on this vertical stack, sorry, go back to it. You've got a bunch of different behaviors that you could have. So if you have scroll, by default, it's going to give you that option to scroll and see all the elements and not expand and fit what's in there. So you could expand first, and then if there's not enough space, scroll. Or you could fit children, which means the grid is going to adjust to fit the size of the elements that you have inside there. And if I look back at the question, I think with the scrolling capabilities there is what we wanted to address. So instead of the scroll, you could either increase the size if there's too much being shown and it already has that scroll bar. You could potentially increase the size of your vertical stack so there's more room there, as well as potentially swapping the vertical stack behavior there to something that fits better if you're not looking for that scroll bar to be present on the side. So you could expand first and then scroll, or change it to fit children, which does not have scrolling happening off default.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Just close out of here for us. All right, and if there's not any more questions, we can end a little bit early today. What is it, Wednesday? So if anybody's got any other questions, we can try and answer those in our last 7 minutes. But if not, can wrap up for today. Thank you all so much. I definitely enjoyed working through those questions and problems. Hope that helped. Y'all have a great day.